What's it like to deal with, to care for people with AIDS? What's it like to be a person with AIDS? John is heterosexual, he's an ex-drug abuser, and he's got AIDS. John, do you find it difficult to walk any great distance?
Yes, I do. I find it quite difficult. I run out of breath, and also I suffer from chronic venous insufficiency in my legs. But, I mean, it's difficult at the best of times living with AIDS, because it places limitations on what you can do. But for me, the challenge of living with AIDS is to push the boundaries of the limitations as far as I can get them, to do everything I possibly can do for as long as I possibly can. It's very hard living with other people's attitudes towards me.
What are those attitudes?
Well, they range from people saying, "Oh, aren't you very brave?" to people saying, "Oh, you're dirty and unclean and I want nothing to do with you."
But aren't you brave?
No, nobody with AIDS is brave. We get fed up being told we're brave. You just have to live with it. You live with AIDS because you have no choice.
Now, how did you contract the virus?
I presume I contracted it through my drug abuse. I was a heroin addict for 13 years. I was diagnosed 2 years ago, which came as quite a shock to me, being a straight man. I didn't think that this so-called gay plague had anything to do with me. So it was quite a shattering blow to be told that I had got the HIV virus.
Did you have any idea that you might have picked up the virus?
I had been sexually promiscuous, quite promiscuous in my youth, yeah, and it had just begun in late 85 to become known that this was a disease that affected promiscuous people as well as gay people, and that it had begun to affect addicts. But because I was so into my drug addiction, I wasn't aware of what was going on around me. So it really was quite a shattering blow. I should have been more aware, but I wasn't. That is the only way I can describe it. I wasn't aware of the threat to myself.
Could you describe what happened when you were told when and where you were?
I was rushed into hospital suffering from a type of pneumonia and a battery of other infections. I had 12 different infections, and I was lying in my hospital bed on a life support machine, and a doctor came into my room and he said, "John, I have to tell you something. There's no easy way to tell you this, but you've got AIDS." And I just thought, oh my God. And I remember screaming, "No, no, 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 no."
Once one has the full-blown AIDS syndrome, then the writing is on the wall. I'm afraid it's an incurable disease.
Dr. Michael Ellis, consultant physician.
But what medicine can do is prolong the life of people with AIDS. For example, the new drug treatment called AZT, when given to people with AIDS, can extend the time that people live. That's one thing that can be done. The other thing that can be done is to treat the various infections and cancers that these people are prone to.
You're looking quite well at the moment.
Well, I work in an office that is staffed entirely by people who have AIDS or ARC, and we find that AIDS seems to be cyclical. It comes in a cycle. You get very, very ill, you recover, and then you have a period where you're quite healthy. And I am very healthy at the moment, which is the first time in almost 2 years that I haven't had an acute infection. At the moment, all of my infections are what is known as chronic, ongoing. But I have nothing that is really acute that's causing me severe, severe problems at the moment.
You still have the Kaposi sarcoma, is that
Yes,
correct?
that they are blotches like lesions on the skin, and they are still there, and they are coming in. I am getting more and more of them as I go along.
If you don't treat the infections, then the individual will die much sooner than he or she should. For example, the dreaded pneumonia can now be treated, and if it's treated at an early stage, there will be virtually 100% recovery from that episode of pneumonia. The problem occurs when the infections come back again. after they've had their first attack of pneumonia, they can go away and live a normal life for a reasonable period of time, and then the infection may recur again. When that happens, the second and the third attacks are much more difficult to treat, and that's when people usually succumb.
How long do you have to live, do you think?
I have as long to live as you have. None of us really know. AIDS, some people see it as a death sentence. I don't see it as that. I have friends who have been diagnosed with full-blown AIDS for 4.5 years, and they look and act as healthy as anybody else. AIDS is a very capricious disease. It has whims. It will take one person on the first time they get infected, the first bout of pneumocystis pneumonia, they will die, or they will die from some related condition, but other people will survive numerous attacks of various opportunistic infections, and nobody can tell the why or the wherefore of it.
Judy Tavania of the Terence Higgins Trust in London.
The Trust is still seen as an organisation for gay men, and that is not what we are anymore. We started off in that way. Now we're an organisation which deals with AIDS, and AIDS isn't just to do with gay men. AIDS is to do with everybody, and that's a very important point to take on board.
The Trust provides help and information about AIDS, and anyone can call in or telephone for help.
Well, the first thing I should really let you know is that in order for there to be any danger to you, this person does not have to be bisexual or homosexual. It's just as possible for an ordinary straight man to pass the virus. Yes, ordinary screwing, as you call it, straightforward sexual intercourse. If he did not use a condom, can you remember whether a condom was used or not?
I think it's very difficult for people to talk about sex, although we make jokes about it the whole time, because it actually means sitting down and looking at ourselves, and we're not really trained to do that when we're young.
You need to find out more about the person with whom you have had sex.
If you're meeting someone for the first time and you want to have sex with that person, you've got to address it, and it's a very difficult thing to do, and it's very embarrassing.
Well, that's his explanation for not using a condom, is it? It's like wearing galoshes in the bath.
All right, so I do meet someone, and I get to the point of wanting to go to bed with him. Are you suggesting I carry a condom around with me?
Right. Well, I think everyone should carry condoms around with them. And that's not just women, men should do it too. It's about time men started to take responsibility for their own health and for their partner's health. That's quite hard to do, and I think some young people in particular think that if you carry a condom around, you're going to be seen as easy. Well, it's about time we looked at our attitudes and started changing them, because it's essential that people do use condoms now.
You take the initiative yourself, you go out, you buy the condoms, you introduce them into your sexual activity, and you tell him that it's your body and you want to protect your body, and you're not prepared to have sexual intercourse with him unless he uses one.
Do many young people approach you? When I say young, I mean 15, 16-year-olds, do they approach you?
Yes, they do, and the calls we've had on our helpline have changed quite considerably. When we first set up, they were nearly all from gay men who actually were worried about AIDS and HIV themselves. We now get more and more calls from what we call the worried well, who are people who think they have AIDS because they've had one experience where they think they might have been infected, and they're in a serious state of anxiety.
Then you should be able to talk to him about things like that, and he should be able to listen to you. And if he just cuts off the subject and he thinks that he's too much of a man to use a condom, then I suggest that you give him the old heave-ho.
I get asked some really interesting questions when I do talk in schools. People seem to think of the most incredibly difficult situations which would never arise. There's a whole range of questions which I always get. Can you get infected from swimming pools? No, you can't. Can you get infected from shaking hands, kissing, sharing cups, breathing over someone? No, you can't. I always say you cannot get infected through saliva and through the air. That's completely out. Social contact is not a way of getting infected. But then people will think of the most incredible situations. I had one young boy ask me, if I had a can of Coke and someone cut their arm and bled into it and he was infected, and then I drank the can of Coke, would I get infected? And I said, well, would you ever do that if you saw someone, bleeding a cut into a can of Coke? And he said, oh, no, I suppose I wouldn't. People do think of very complex situations which they wouldn't let happen. Those are the kind of areas I'm always getting asked about. And what I always end up by saying is that there really are only two ways in which the virus is passed on. That's when infected body fluids like vaginal secretions, semen and blood are exchanged. And they have to actually get into another person's body. So they have to get through your skin or into your body some other way. And the ways that happen is through screwing. I call it screwing because that makes it very clear what it means. When infected semen or vaginal fluids get into someone else's body and you don't use a condom to keep them out, and through drug use when you share needles because you can inject a lot of someone else's infected blood along with the drug into your arm.
If you have to use drugs, if you're addicted and you find that you cannot stop using drugs, for God's sake use your own syringes and if there's a needle exchange in your area, use your needle exchange. And the needle exchange is a reasonable good thing. It will mean that addicts won't be passing on, hopefully, any other infectious diseases through their syringes because you pass on hepatitis B as well.
To look at alternative safer sex activities, we've talked a bit about screwing or penetrative sex. There are other things you can do which are safer. For example, if you masturbate on your own, that's completely safe. You're not transmitting the fluids to someone else. Mutual masturbation, when you masturbate with someone else, is safe provided that you don't get vaginal secretions and semen into cuts on your fingers because it has to actually get through the cut into your body to infect you.
But apart from the mechanics of sex and safer sex, there is also the issue of greater responsibility, isn't there?
There are two sides to that. One is about taking responsibility for our own health. If we're not infected, we want to stay uninfected. The other thing is if we're having sex with someone and we don't know that we're not infected, then we have to make sure we don't infect that person too. So yes, of course, there is an area of responsibility there, and it's very important. Sex is fun, and everyone has to have the choice about sex. I don't think anyone should go around saying, don't have sex with this person, or have that number of sexual partners, or don't have any sex at all. People have to make those decisions for themselves.
So when you sleep with somebody, even if you're a nice 16-year-old girl who hasn't slept with anybody else, and you meet a nice 19-year-old boy, I don't look like I've got AIDS. You can't tell who has the HIV infection just by looking at them. You have to assume that there's a possibility that anyone you're sleeping with may have come in contact with a HIV virus, and therefore everybody should take responsibility. I really think it's down to personal responsibility. It's your body, yeah? For God's sake, look after it, because if you don't, nobody else will.
The only 100% reliable way of reducing transmission to zero is to abstain from sexual intercourse, in other words, to lead a celibate life. For the vast majority of us, that is an impractical thing to do. The next way is to consider establishing a relationship, a one-to-one relationship with a person you know to be free from the disease. If you've got a happily married couple who've been married for 30 years and they've not had sexual intercourse outside of marriage, there's no reason to think that they've got the AIDS virus. There's no reason for the risky behavior group. If one boy picks up a girl at a disco and has sex with her on one occasion, nowadays that is high-risk behavior and should not happen in the first place. Unprotected sex should not happen. So if one has been placed in that situation, then one perhaps should consider the need to go for antibody testing. But let me make it absolutely clear, it's just not having a blood test that one needs to go for, it's all the counselling and advice that needs to go with the test, really before the test and afterwards as well.
Steve talks about being treated for AIDS.
What I became very conscious of was that my life was being preserved by the skill and dedication of others, and that meant I was no longer as independent as I would have liked to have been. I mean, psychologically, you just knew you had a disease that was potentially sort of fatal. But if you think about it, there are lots of things in life which we do which are potentially fatal, and I think anyone can live with that. It's fortunate, too, that I've got a partner with whom I can talk about it in a sensible sort of way, and I think it helps to be able to do that. Certainly I wouldn't be happy about my sort of workmates knowing. I don't know just what level of education, you know, the whole sort of office staff have.
I think a lot of these young people that come with full-blown AIDS are desperate to seek a cure, and it's my function to explain to them as objectively as possible, without being sort of too cool or too unkind and cold, just what the situation is for them, that we can do something to treat the various infections and tumours, but we can't actually cure the disease that they've got. What these individuals need is a lot more compassion from members of society than they are or have been experiencing until recently.
When I came to the Trust, I knew how the virus was transmitted. In my head, I knew there was no danger through social contact, and I still thought, well, when I have to sit next to somebody who has AIDS or is infected, how am I going to feel? Am I going to be able to kiss that person or give that person a hug? And I worried. And then when the situation arose, I did it, and I came away and I felt wonderful, because it felt like my fears had just disappeared and what I knew and what I felt had come together. But that is something that a lot of people have to go through before they realise that, you know, they can trust people and they can believe what they're told about AIDS.
When you have seen, like I have, a 14-year-old guy in Edinburgh who is dying from AIDS, it really brings it home to you that this is a human issue. This is an issue for straight men, this is an issue for gay people, this is an issue for young men and women everywhere.
What people need to realise is that there are millions of people infected in the world now, millions of people with the AIDS virus, of whom I suspect more than 50% will eventually die at a very early stage in their life from full-blown AIDS. And one needs to be confronted with this reality and to realise it is not just a disease of the gay population, it's a disease of the heterosexual population. If we can take that message to people and to teach them about safe sex and safe needles and all the rest of it, to establish relationships between people to cut down on the chance of transmitting this virus from one to the other in the ways in which we've gone over, then this disease can be halted.
I think what we have to put before a lot of young people is whether sexual intimacy is something that they will reserve for a relationship, say, where two people have agreed to share their futures. Now that, I think, is a moral decision. And it's quite right that society should have an opinion about that.
You say you've come to terms with death?
I think so, yeah. I mean, say it might not happen for the next 5 years, 10 years. We don't know. It could have happened next, well, I wouldn't say next week, but until they find a cure. And obviously you're not going to see the age of, in my case, 40.
Teachers are advised that programs 7 and 8 are more suitable for the older child. These programs should be previewed before use with the class.